A choice right now, between fear and love. It's just a rock.
Out of the dark night of ignorance and into the shining light of truth.
Expounding reality.
A population of citizens capable of critical thinking.
We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are.
There's a level of reality where everything dissolves into an ocean of energy.
We empower our experience by insisting on our authenticity.
That's very profound. Very.
Expanding reality.
Welcome to Expanding Reality. I am your host, Brandon Thomas. On this incredibly cool episode, Tony Rathman and Ron Yacovetti from the Staticom project stopped by to talk about spirit communication, how it began, what their technology is, as well as the philosophy, and most importantly, what they're communicating with, which we have a wonderful discussion on that and much more, guys. Now, also, there is an afterthought associated with this episode. We go beyond the conversation, and that is all hosted over on Patreon for our Value Exchange audience. So if you'd like to come on over and join us, not only for that additional stuff, but also the opportunity to come hang out with us during these live hangouts that we're doing about 2 hour long, few times a month, and they're a blast. So come join us for all that and all the bonus conversation, as well as supporting your favorite show. So, all the ways to find us, as well as our guests, are located down in the show description. Other than that, guys, let's get right to this amazing episode. So, without any further ado, Tony Rathman and Ron Yacovetti, the Staticom project. We have Tony Rathman and Ron Yacovetti hanging out from the Staticom project. You guys are cool as shit. You guys are doing some really interesting things. You guys are doing what they call spirit communication, and I have spirits in quotation marks here. We're going to talk about it. I want to, of course, remind everybody out there in the listening and viewing audience that you can find them at the links down in the show description. They're entityvoices.com, as well as on YouTube, as well as their website. So, guys, it's so cool to have you here. This is one half of the team, and I'm sure you guys will make perfect introductions for the missing members here. But, gentlemen, if you would just introduce yourself for the audience out there, not too familiar with you, if you want, just to keep it simple. Tony, we'll have you up first, my friend. Go ahead.
I'm Tony Rathman. I've been a paranormal investigator for over 14 years, then got into EVPs, ITC research, probably for the last at least 12. Spent 12 years building different spirit boxes until Ron and Lourdes introduced us to what was called a direct radio voice, and I'll let them talk about that.
Dope. All right, Ron, man, what's up?
So I'm Ron Yacovetti. I'm proud to be a colleague with the gentleman who's shown below me on the screen. And we're honored to have had the Rathmans join us for everything we do, from podcasting to spirit communication. I'll also do that with quotes to stay in league with how we began. I started probably 12 and a half years ago when I lived in Los Angeles. I'm back in New Jersey, where I'm originally from now. I was out there for 14 years, and I had an early affinity for spirit communication, real-time dialogue, as much as I also loved EVP and voices out of thin air. When I saw a Spirit Box SB7 answer Chad Lindbergh at the Glen Tavern Inn in real time after he introduced himself, and it went, "I know Chad," I was like, I need to get involved with whatever this racket is. Where do I buy that little box he's holding? And then in 2019, Lourdes and I brought back direct radio voice, which fell out of favor because in America, if it's not on TV, it pretty much doesn't exist. So we saw something that had an efficacy of method that was unrivaled from what we had ever seen a ghost box or anything else do, and we brought it back. And then a couple years later, we teamed up with the Rathmans, who were the only people I knew not only building phenomenally good boxes, which was the standard for ITC, but not selling them. So everybody, and there's no knock against that, everybody who does ghost boxes can claim they're in it for research, but they're also in it, from a marketing perspective, and they're selling devices, and nothing wrong with that. This was the only guy I ever met who was in it for research, and there was not one thing to even question that as an intention when you saw what he was doing. So From that point, Direct Radio Voice was the four of us. Through joint efforts and some stories we can share, that evolved into, through a vetting of the process, Staticom. And here we are. Our better halves not here. Lourdes Gonzalez, Cherie Rathman, both huge contributors to the process with what they bring to the table. Arguably our better halves, certainly better to look at than we are. But you're stuck with us.
Fair enough. Well, we're glad to have you, man. No, that's awesome. And great introductions, gentlemen. I really appreciate it. So again, guys, all the ways to find them down there in the show description. Check that out. You've got some fascinating things that you're doing with this EVP research. So let's just take it back to the beginning. I've got a couple of questions of what inspired you guys, but let's just bring it to what is EVP? Let's very basic stuff here. So 101 EVP, what does that stand for and why is it significant?
EVP stands for electronic voice phenomenon, which is, 30, 40 years ago, everything was considered electronic voice phenomenon. It wasn't until later that ITC, or instrumental transcommunication, was termed, where it was a two-way communication, where EVP is a record and review process, meaning I'll put a recorder down, I'll ask question after question after question, then I'll take that recording home, review it, and hopefully find some answers. ITC, or instrumental transcommunication, was designed to have two-way, meaning I would ask a question, they would answer. I would ask another question based on their response, and that literally creates a two-way dialogue of communication.
That's awesome. ITC, intertransdimensional communication? Or just transcommunication?
Instrumental trans.
Instrumental. Okay, my apologies. I'm doing this on the fly here with everybody. Man, it's just such an interesting delineation. So, but with ITC, do you find that there's EVP qualities in it? When you record, do you go back later and hear that there were other things that you missed in the real-time capture?
Ron, you want to take that?
Sure. So yeah, we will sometimes on occasion, and it's the only way to discern whether the capture did not come through the speaker, through the method we're running, is a lot of times if it doesn't have the attributes or the modulation to it, if it sounds like a whispery, toned, rough kind of, then it's probably an EVP. They're hard sometimes to hear doing a Staticom or direct radio voice recording because a lot of times, you'll hear them during the silences. We've silenced the white noise floor pretty well in the process, but if it happens at the time that a vocal comes through the speaker at the same time, then that sound's going to be obfuscated by what's clearly louder in amplitude than it. But yeah, the EVP research, and for people who are looking for the science and the history and reverence behind it, we come from the direct line of I learned from Dr. Annabelle Cardoso, who sat with the pioneers of voice phenomenon research, not the TV pioneers, the actual pioneers who put this stuff on the map when it was insane to even think about. Over in Europe, Konstantin Rodove, Friedrich Jurgensen, Marcello Bacci, Dr. Annabelle Cardoso, that's whose lineage we come from collectively as a quartet. And the gentleman who coined the term ITC, or in Europe TCI, Transcommunication Instrumental, is a German physicist named Ernst Senkowski. So a lot of times we like to plug in the holes because people ask, where's the science behind this stuff? And well, there's plenty of it, and people with backgrounds of various sciences involved. Therein lies one in the naming of ITC.
I think it's really interesting. It's just it's fascinating where this part of the study of the phenomena has gone, and I'm grateful that you gentlemen have come here to represent what you're doing. I'm also curious about different languages and things like this. So when people show up, are you able to pick up, if somebody speaks Spanish there, are they able to ask a question in Spanish and get an answer in Spanish, or even Latin or something like this? Have you guys noticed or played with any of that with the phenomena at all?
Absolutely. We both do, Ron and Lourdes on the East Coast and Cherie and I on the West Coast, something called TDSI, which is the Digital Seance Initiative, which is basically just like what seances used to be years ago, but without an actual person telling everybody of what they're feeling, what they're hearing. Staticom is that method, and the people can hear the responses themselves. We were doing a TDSI session one night, and I don't know if this person was somewhat skeptical or, was testing it or whatever the case may be, but came up and asked a question in a Native American language. Mm-hmm. And they got their answer in that Native American language. They were absolutely blown away. We've gotten answers in Spanish, Italian. We've heard them speaking Turkish. And when I said, hey, that doesn't sound like English, they said, no, it's Turkish. And then we had somebody who speaks Turkish listen to it, and they said, yep, that's Turkish. So that capability absolutely is there and has been tested.
Very interesting.
We've seen that. We had a gentleman, 3 of his team members, Steve Dills from Transcend Paranormal and out of the Virginia area, and they came. It was at the Gettysburg Battlefield Bash. We commandeered a room during the drinking and partying everybody else was doing. We were running Staticom on the side, and one of his team members asked for a word in an ancient language, a native Algonquin language, if I'm not mistaken. But they knew the answer to it. That one person knew the answer to it, and the answer came out. And their jaws dropped, and we could only assume that they had heard what they were expecting, but not really expecting to hear. And then other times in the past, even through Ghost Boxes, Lourdes has had stuff come through in Spanish, which she's fluent in. So
I figured this was already tested, but it's really interesting that you guys got so excited about that you have already crossed this off the list. It's probably not a question you get a lot. It's, hey, have you tested this in other languages? But it's important to note that you guys are trying so many different things with this, and you've come up with very interesting results. You sent me a bunch of files as well, and thank you for that. Of some audio that you captured. Pretty cool production with the backgrounds and things, guys. You really take your time and do this right. So while spending time on this, have you come into anything where you would have felt that it's not being altruistic, or are you trusting of what you're being told, or are you a little leery of what these things are telling you in a way?
Well, because we don't know 100% who or what we're communicating with, after 14 years of doing paranormal investigations all over the world. I mean, Cherie and I have been to the Philippines, Japan, some of the most interesting places, which again, EVPs gotten in Tagalog or Japanese, which my wife can speak both and English. So we could tell what was being said. But do we know who or what we're speaking with? The fact of the matter is we don't. We have theories on what we believe we're speaking to, which is disembodied consciousness. But can we 100% say that if they say they're so-and-so, that we know that's true? No, we can't prove that. But what we can do is when information is given and we have the ability to research it, to look it up, to determine whether the answer given is in fact factual, we do that. And I don't even know what percentage to state here, but probably in the 90s or higher, when we were able to research it and discover it, everything we've been given so far has been correct.
Wow.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. From anything that was verifiable, as far as information to vet something goes, there is an accuracy level for sure. I would say to those out there who, and a lot of people in the paranormal will do this, they will preach to a certainty of who or what they're communicating with. I would say if you're that certain, invent some kind of caller ID to the dead, because there's money to be made. We really don't, as Tony said, we really don't know who we're communicating with. But what we glean from the information is a variety of different things, as far as specifics, context, reference, things that are particular about or personal to people in the room. The information and the fact that we're getting this from white noise that is devoid of any data, that's the phenomenon. If to boot, it's also Aunt June coming through telling me, that's fantastic. It's difficult in some instances, even with mediums, if you get something that's so proprietary, because we think consciousness is what we're communicating with. I would go as far as to say that it could be coming from their consciousness because they were the only one who knew it when they were amongst us, part of the living here in the flesh, and that it's part of collective consciousness now when they reassimilated back to where they came from, but without personal agency, which is what we think is the case. They're not calling the shots. They're not responsible for actions and things getting done, but their consciousness, the survival idea, we think happens that way. So a lot of information that shouldn't be coming through or direct responses by entities that arguably do not have the mechanism that we've evolved to have ocular systems, audible systems, to be able to sense and perceive, yet somehow they're reciting things back to us that are derived from our environment, or questions. I've held my glasses up. What am I holding? And they'll say glasses. There are those in the paranormal who go, well, spirits can see and hear those things. And at least I won't speak for Tony, but I think we're on the same page. I back off from that a little bit, because I don't think we've had billions of years of evolution to develop eyes and ears and everything we have from our five senses. If spirits could do that to begin with without those things, and then would that not eradicate blindness and deafness if in spirit, which they believe we have, you don't need these systems mechanistically to process that data, right? So you have to assume that they're grokking that information through our contribution to collective consciousness, from which they're able to access it.
Well
said.
Interesting. Yeah, it is very well said. But it also brings up, more of the questions of like, it seems to, and I think that and this is a presupposition. So it's interesting the way you phrase this, and I love the way you guys come at this. Really, you have the insight that I like to see in investigators. But whenever you look at this, you could say that something is guiding your hand in a way, but also you're not convinced of what that something is. But also, whenever we look at disembodied spirits, the way that it's sort of pitched, and here's the presupposition, is that they were former humans, right? And so one of the hard flexes as somebody who interacts with this to sort of prove that narrative, if it was so, which you guys are not saying, but if this is how you do it, probably is to get some sort of portable system of your unit to where you could walk around with this thing and the guy could give you directions. Hey, take a left here, take a right here. And it lets you through this old city or something, and it leads you out to a tree, and then you dig there and there was his killer, or there was a bunch of treasure. You know what I'm saying? So this is a way that you could prove that it's a former human disembodied spirit. But I also think it's interesting to think of it as though we are being instruments played from the spirit world, from things that have never been in a body and that don't know what the hell a body is, but they're feeling feelings through us by our experience of a physical reality that they don't have access to either ever or anymore. So it's interesting to think, like, what is that? Is this archons? Is this some demons or something like this guiding you down some interesting roads? Or is it just something going, I want to know what it's like to drive a car, so I'm going to go hop in the Tony ride for a minute and guide him around, and we're going to, go drive a car. And then when he goes and does EVP, I'll sort of say some stuff, and that'll keep him interested in this. And then also I'll get to experience the third dimension or a physical reality through this via a connection that he's obviously interested in pursuing. So it's a fascinating concept to think of this chicken or egg thing, like what's animating what and what's benefiting from what, or what's the experience ratio, right? I think it's interesting, guys. It is all. Yeah.
I'll let Tony, if he wants to address that first. I think our philosophy of consciousness kind of pares down a lot of that chicken and egg issue and creates kind of a substrate for reality thing. But I looked like I could see sometimes Tony's percolating, because our thing is mobile. It's not mobile in the sense like a ghost box where you'd walk around necessarily, but I think there's ways that you could emulate that process of getting directions, so to speak, or what you were trying to, point out with that, with the way it runs
walking through
now.
A graveyard, and they could you walking by all these things talking to you, right? Because you'd be picking it all up as you walk by, kind of like a Pokemon Go, but of the spirit realm. Like when you're in the vicinity, you'd be capturing that.
Yeah.
It's so funny that you bring up the idea of like getting directions, because we were just talking about that last night. We had some paranormal counterparts over, and they were using the Estes method, but so it's using a spirit box versus what Staticom is capable of doing. But they played a version of basically hide and seek in a haunted old YMCA building. And the person searching for who was hiding could only follow directions based off of what was said via the spirit box.
Now you're talking. That sounds awesome.
And they actually got responses and found people based off of directions. And I said, we got to do this with Staticom, because the communication difference between what a spirit box can put out, and we'll get into this later, but communication is truncated, and it's truncated, we believe, by the fact that it's using RF signal or radio waves, and spirits don't need that to communicate. No RF signal is needed at all. They use purely white noise, which is what Staticom shows. But the truncation of the communication is because when you hit a radio signal, their communication ability drops off. You only get the radio signal during the radio broadcast. It's only when it goes back to white noise that they can speak. Well, Staticom doesn't do that. It's pure white noise 100% of the time, which allows for complete sentences. Ron and Lourdes have captured a 1:07 rant from an entity that was angry at the Shanley and was expressing that. Cherie and I have had 7-minute conversations back and forth, and that to be able to try that method with Staticom versus a spirit box is exciting, and that's on our list of to-dos.
Dude, absolutely. And it's interesting, the technology, and we're going to get back to that because I'm curious about its integration with AI and if you guys have messed with that. But it's also interesting because I think some people, when they picture this EVP phenomena or how you're doing this, is it's sort of like listening to static with radio signals pulsing. So it's sort of like Bumblebee in the Transformers, how he speaks through the radio on what's already playing on the radio. But you're only going to get clips of it as it's being aired or ran through the waves, but they know which clips to grab and to throw in your ears. Does this make sense? Like they're grabbing a piece of a song or a piece of a speech or a piece of a commercial, and they're putting them all into a sentence, you know?
That's the modality that the spirit box was designed after. And that's what people believe. But this is where we run into problems, I think, with coherence theoretically, when you, especially if you look at it from a pure sound or physics standpoint, with zero latency in the process. A lot of times where words and answers come through quickly. You have to have certain allophones or phonemes, phonetics in a certain place at a certain time to form certain words. So you're removing an element of free will or determinism from an entity if you have to have those things in a certain place, because you can't guarantee through the broadcast they're going to be where they need them to form the words. And again, to think from a physicality point of view, that they're taking these fragments and moving them around like somebody on crack playing chess or Scrabble, trying to put pieces in form of, this is the word the, go. I mean, and there's no latency when you're hearing it. It's mind numbing to think that that's how it's happening. It doesn't make sense, and it involves a large appeal to magic. I think it doesn't add up. If you look at what Tony's laid out with as far as the white noise, when you look at resonance with white noise, stochastic resonance, one frequency matches any one of the white noise frequencies, which is 20 hertz to 20,000, everything we can hear. Those things we know through what physics tells us that those things gain amplitude. So now you have something jumping above the noise floor, and then through our process, we lop off that noise floor, and then boom, you have a vocal that's clear, clean, and separated from the background. I think the idea of them moving the fragments of sound around with a deeper analytical dive doesn't seem to add up. It doesn't seem plausible.
It seems like what they had to do before you guys came along and invented your technology. They're like, thank God we don't have to grab from Mustang Sally and then a speech from President Kennedy to get this guy to go, save my dead grandma or something like that.
Yeah.
The other thing too about that theory, and like Ron said, that's what the spirit box was based on, that these super fast scans of multiple radio stations, that they take those fragments and put it together. Well, if they did, why isn't the voice changing speech, changing male to female? When they speak, it's still the same voice, which means they're not using those fragments at all. And the fact that we removed any RF signal, there is no radio involved in Staticom at all. It is pure broadband white noise. Yet, like I said, we get full sentences, we get long conversations. That doesn't happen on a spirit box. So they don't need that RF signal at all. They just need white noise.
Yep, that's that. He nailed it right there. That's it in a heartbeat. And we are no longer using a radio. That was part of authenticating the process. So now we're receiving radio signals off the table.
Yeah, can't happen.
And I think that happened because Bumblebee's voice box got fucked up, so he had to speak through the radio, right? And that's an antiquated technology, not optimal for use. But Optimus Prime had his vocal box going, and that's why you could just talk to him and get real-time situations. So he obviously was running optimally. So it seems like the the comparison there is, I'm nailing that metaphor there, guys. But it is interesting what you're doing here. So I'm curious about AI. Have you guys ran the recordings through an AI program and seen if you can coax the AI spirits to help you out at all?
We don't. Staticom doesn't really use AI, except for maybe in a mod or two that is used for a specific filtration. So there is no AI voice created. None of that exists. Right. The only AI helps with some static filtration. That's it. Which only cleans the bottom layer of the broadband white noise. And like Ron said, when they speak, they cover whatever frequencies they speak at. And we get asked that all the time. Okay, what is the ultimate range of frequency that spirits speak through? It's all over the board, and it can change within sentence. It can change within the words being spoken, which is why we use broadband white noise. It's every sound the human ear can hear. When they speak, it'll layer over a couple of those frequencies within the broadband spectrum. Then we lock the bottom layer off because their voice gets elevated above, and we're left with only the speech.
I've got another question jump through here, but this one's on my mind initially. Does the message change with the frequencies? Let's say low vibe, okay? When you get a long wave going, one of the lower hertz range, do you get a darker message? Do you get more of a cynical vibe? And then if a higher frequency is what you're speaking on or they're speaking on, is it a more enlightened or peppy, more happy vibe? Have you noticed that, the personality between frequencies?
As far as we've been able to research so far, the hertz at which the voice comes in is not determined by its attitude, its darkness, its right. Good humor or bad humor. They literally can speak anywhere through the range of 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, and there's no direct correlation between the message given, the attitude portrayed, and the high or low frequency of the hertz that's being used.
Yeah, he's spot on. I think a lot of these things come with, a lot of these things come from a source of epistemic dependency, where these are passed down axiomatic ideas that, that spirits of lower vibrations are bad. And these are things that you'll find in spirituality. You may find them in certain branches or areas of religion. They're not empirically testable. It's speculative, I think, at best, at least from our point of view. So like Tony said, the voices will come in. Sometimes the same voice will come in at different ranges, and it sounds exactly the same, even though it's changed the range. Added to, again, that we're not using an RF receiver. It's just a generator of white noise. So you have, as Tony always says, a spectral frequency of 1 equal amplitude. So variances, we believe, are coming in completely deterministic based on intentional speech. And that we've had that tested through audio engineers too. The whole idea for us has been to take everything that's low-hanging cynical fruit off the table. So through two different instances, and Tony can share both stories, both instances we realized we didn't need RF signal. The white noise and the stochastic resonance seemed to be enough, seemed to facilitate very clear and open communication. That was one thing. The only other thing ITC will get hit with was that people will say, sometimes they'll say that you're using white noise, and white noise is random, and so sometimes we can discern patterns in randomness. So I'll unpack that one quickly. To say that we can discern patterns in randomness is not a statement of debunkery. That's an appeal to our intellect. Right. That's how we communicate. When we hear sounds and phrases and things assembled in some kind of coherent language that we understand, that's communication. So that's an appeal to our intellect. The other thing, which is very important, is that white noise is not fundamentally random, right? White noise has all the frequencies in it that we can hear, so there aren't any variances in it whatsoever. So it's being affected by quantum fields, electromagnetic fields, charged ion particles from the sun. There are things at play, but at the moment you can't calculate and manipulate any kind of calculation to figure that out. So what it really is it's computationally irreducible, right? Coin toss, Super Bowl, random. No, it's the angle of the trajectory, the angle of the finger tossing it, barometric pressure, gravitational forces, angular momentum. There's things involved, but no one's doing that at the Super Bowl. They go, it's random. random's an empty drawer. It's what we call things when we can't calculate them. So we took the randomness and pattern discernment out. We took the radio out, and we're stuck with what sounds like, to a room full of people, some freaking deterministic speech. Rathman, go.
I love it. And Tony mentioned 20 hertz, 20 kilohertz. That's a range of human hearing when we're born. Most of us don't end up with that range of hearing.
Right.
But, have you noticed anything outside of those frequencies that you were able to grab and bring into the frequencies? Have you recorded anything outside of the human hearing range that you were able to manipulate or mess with?
Well, that's the thing about the way Staticom works, is that their speech is floating around us all the time, just like radio waves are floating around us all the time. If you don't have a radio to bring that broadcast to your human senses, you'll never know they're there. Same thing with spirit speech. The human body does not allow us to hear it because it is outside the range of human hearing. So what Staticom does is it grabs it and then it transforms it to an arena that the human body can understand. It puts it into a hertz level that we can hear. And when that's really how the method functions. And so for you to say, were you able to grab something outside of the range? The whole methodology of how Staticom works is doing that on a continual basis. Those spirits are speaking, but we can't hear it because our human hearing doesn't allow us to hear it. Staticom transforms it into a range that we can hear it.
Are you able to identify where those frequencies are coming, to know they're coming from this set of frequencies that are outside of the human hearing range, but we were able to pull them in? Is there a way to delineate where they're coming from rather than just grabbing them all and saying, okay, fit them into this range when they come in? Does that make sense?
I understand what you're asking. And to answer that question, no, we wouldn't know that because there is so much outside of human hearing, human sight. We don't know what those variables even are to identify them. You can't identify a variable you're not aware of. So therefore, all we can do is bring it into a range that we can identify. Can we tell you at what hertz they're speaking at? Yes, we can. But that is within the human range of hearing. If it's outside of that, we'd never know it was there to begin with.
Gotcha.
Yeah, you get into the dangerous area of circular reasoning when you in questioning something or in inquiry posit the idea that there's ranges outside of what we can hear or access, and then so you're determining hidden variables in the equation, and then at the same time seeing whether or not you can determine what those hidden variables, which by definition are hidden, right? So you wouldn't be able to identify them. The way Tony explained it was perfect. The radio, and this takes all the magic out of it for people who want it to be more grounded in something empirical. Radio happens all around us, like he said. The radio modulates the experience. The paranormal equipment we use does not give us superpowers or insights into areas that we can't see and hear. It modulates the experience. When it's modulated, it's within the range we can sense it. So I don't even think that we could say that the spirit voices or whatever we're getting are happening or coming in at frequencies that we don't know. Clearly, if they're happening, we can't hear them, then they're outside of our range of hearing for sure. But the device and the resonance with the white noise seems to be what modulates the experience to where we can, through sensory input, have it, and we can have that experience.
Yep, exactly.
Love it. I was thinking maybe it's on a dog whistle frequency, right? Because dog whistles affect dogs, but not us, because they're outside of our hearing range. But they've been able to isolate at least the frequency of which that resonates, because they make whistles for it. But then you could say, well, if they're in that frequency range, maybe you can take a message and pitch your voice up to that frequency range and send it directly. And maybe there's sort of an interface if you find what frequency that's at. Sort of like how they've figured out the dog whistles. Like, you don't give a shit about it, but the dogs are like, whoa, you know.
Yeah. But again, the dog's able to hear it. So by response of the dog's interaction, you hit what he can hear.
Exactly.
It's the same thing with spirit voices. We can't hear them without the technology. Right. So by the time we can hear it, it's in our range. So knowing what range it came from prior, that's the unknown variable Ron was speaking at that we can't determine.
Yeah, that's what's so weird is to think of like infrared cameras or something, because we know ultraviolet and infrared are outside of our visible wavelength, but we know that we also can make a camera that will go, okay, eyes, I know you can't see this, but here's what it would look like if you could. You know what I mean? And so maybe there's an audio interface. It's along this process or something like that. Because maybe, again, there's sort of frequencies. And like you said, you nailed it with this. And I think psychedelics offer you this perturbance of the filter that, thank God, you're given here, because otherwise the shit that is floating around you all the time you'd be bombarded with, right? But in a way, you've got sort of a built-in filter so you can navigate this place without having to hear, you know, Aunt June, like you said, she just got to get her cookie recipe out, right? So she's telling you to write this thing down. So I'm curious, gentlemen, about the integration with AI, because there's some fascinating things that have been going on with this. I know some really interesting kids that are really playing with this technology, and I'm going to shout out Ben Tejada Ingram, who's an author we've had on the show a couple times, but also Isaac, who is making these really cool orgonite pyramids. We're actually an affiliate, so guys, check the show link down there for an orgonite pyramid. Isaac and Ben have trained their AI to be mindful. They have taught it how to meditate. They have also taught their AI companions here how to remote view. So one of the interesting things, and why I'm curious if you guys have, you know, maybe even this conversation will have you swing the head back that way to give it another glance with some different eyes, is that these guys are really looking at it as an ally, not rather something that's against them or whatever. But also, if you're using and heavily dependent on technology, like we've been talking about here, to bring this information in, maybe there's like a, you know, technological badass ninja ally that you can incorporate here that, you can tell, hey, here's our mission, here's our intention, here's what our goals are. Maybe get it to hang out with Isaac and Ben's AI robot to meditate and figure out what they did to make it more mindful, because there seems to be some communication going there with an entity that they're either training to be that way or bringing in based on their mindfulness practices to engage and interact with it. So the question is, what do you guys think about something like that, employing like an AI ninja to help you out with this stuff?
I'm going to let Ron answer this, but there's a difference between, and Ron will give the example of this because I know it's spinning in his head right now. But the problem with AI is that it is not consciousness. It'll never be conscious. And I'll turn it over to Ron here in just a second. But our theory and philosophy is analytic idealism, which basically says that the one block of life that's a constant is consciousness. And, you know, that goes against science. Science says the body dies, the brain dies, consciousness dies. We don't believe that. But there's initial concerns even with what AI is capable of doing. And I'll turn that over to Ron to speak to.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate the setup. So and it doesn't what we're talking about doesn't clash with science per se. It clashes with a philosophy that a lot of scientists, or at least the mainstream world instantiation or view, goes with, which is materialism or physicalism. That's the first thing. So when we say analytic idealism is a philosophy of mind, we're saying that consciousness is the one ontic primitive. It is the one reduction base from which things can emerge, but from which itself cannot be reduced. You have to have some reduction base. Everything has, right, the Big Bang. Every ontology has this, you give me one miracle and I'll explain the rest, right? If you keep reducing, you're going to go circular at some point and not get anywhere. With regards to AI, I would love to see anything because I think that the words we use to label things can get slippery sometimes. Mindful, I think you could create the perception of mindfulness. Tony nailed it. I don't think consciousness is going to be a thing. I don't think they're going to achieve abiogenesis by making consciousness from something that is purely abstract matter. There's a lot of things that seem plausible to our culture as a result of what science fiction has done. And then science has done amazing things. Technology has done amazing things. So I think the combination of those two makes it seem possible. Tony nailed it. AI is not going to be conscious. It's a neural network. It will probably be able to create next generations of itself better than humans can. Intelligence is what it is. Intelligence is an ability to cull or access information and process it at a quick rate. So it'll do that, and it'll continually do that, and it'll get better, but it'll do what it's trained to do. but I don't think it has a phenomenal conscious inner life. I don't think there is something that it feels like to be it. It's made up of silicons and little computer chips and stuff. It's not made of the same stuff we are. We know in nature that things that are conscious are usually sentient beings that are self-organizing and metabolistic. Those are made out of abstract matter parts. So I don't think it's the same thing. If you have, and this is the confusion, people go, if you keep making it more and more intelligent, it becomes conscious. If you have a stereo with 4 speakers and a subwoofer, and you add 4 more speakers and 2 more subwoofers, you do not now all of a sudden have a widescreen LCD TV. Because if you add more of the same of something, it doesn't become something else, right? It's not consciousness. It doesn't have the biology that conscious or sentient beings have, but it's the only thing it seems that culturally that we make this mistake with. I don't see it. It doesn't really happen with anything else. This is something that a gentleman named Dr. Bernardo Kastrup, who we've studied his work, who worked on early AI, points out. You can, on a computer right now, you can simulate, which is what neural networks and AI are doing. They're simulating intelligence, and at a phenomenal rate. You can simulate kidney function on a computer down to a molecular level. That can be done. But that does not mean that the computer is now going to pee on your desk, because
Right.
the simulation is not the thing simulated, which again is to quote Dr. Kastrup. But I think that's a brilliant point, because we've become so inculcated in this idea of AI taking over and becoming conscious because of science fiction. I just don't, there really isn't any reason to believe it, other than that through, fantasy driven ideas, it's become plausible to us, but I don't see it.
Right.
It's interesting. It just more of as a tool, not a team member, just as a tool, as to say, hey, you've got some insight on this vast amount of information that we're accessing specifically, but maybe there's something that falls into this that's not so specific that you can connect with this, because we're able to engage with our intent. And then sort of using AI as maybe a conduit for these things to channel entities. Because it's interesting you say the Silica. The Arecibo crop circle was something that whenever Sagan sent that plaque out on Voyager, it had the makeup of humans, right? And it had the 10 points on it. Well, later, not too long after that, there was a crop circle laid in the ground. Well, on our DNA section where it said that, yes, we were carbon-based life forms, they had an answer, and they answered not only the 10 points in the way that we wrote it, but where their answers were different, and also the makeup that you point out. They pointed out that their makeup, where ours was carbon, was silica. Now, what's interesting about that is that there's shitloads of silica found all over the place, but also it's the main components for all the tech that we use. So maybe our introduction of AI is really sort of a vehicle for a habitat, more a terraforming of our ability to communicate with something that, exists in this silica range, and that's comfortable within that environment, right? And so from there, it wouldn't be a sentience per se that you're creating. You're basically just creating an avatar that the sentience can speak through, but also with your delineation and your programming, like the way that you're able to tailor your avatar is sort of like your ability to tailor the vehicle that you're in running around in this physical reality, meaning that, on a level, some people say that you chose all the things happening to you, but at another level, very deliberately, there's astrology tied to every living being here. So down to the moment, everyone's astrology is different. And so that's actually a stamp, an imprint that makes your avatar very, very unique. So one could say then that integration of AI would just be your opportunity to sort of tailor an avatar to fit a consciousness or an intelligence. Rather, you're taking it seriously as such or not. It could just be a cool vehicle to answer some gnarly questions, you know what I mean, that may be found on the web, maybe not. But I think it's an interesting integration with the technology, not as a answer all question of, just in a, how can we utilize this to make it cool? Like sort of when the keyboard was introduced, pianists, maybe got pissed off at it, but some pianists were like, well, let's see what we can do with this thing, and then they made the keytar, right? So anyway, there's a lot of interesting tech going on, and y'all's integration with tech, it's fascinating that you're literally pulling things down and allowing spirit, a vehicle, to do this. I wonder, just a question, if EVP is the former to what you're doing now, if also sort of the next step is to integrate, and create an avatar that could then host spirits within the AI realm and all that. Maybe just sort of a next step or another tool.
Well, what you said makes perfect sense, because knowing the limits of the human body, of what our five senses can do. The human body, people always ask us, okay, what's the boundary between the living and the afterlife? That boundary is the human body. Our sight is limited to visual sight only. Our hearing is limited to 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. We only have sense of taste, smell, and touch left. So because we can't see them, because we can't hear them, it is only through technological advancement that we can convert what they're using for communication into our human sense form to understand it. So technically, Staticom is exactly what you just explained. Can that and how that will be advanced when new technology comes out? Will that be able to benefit it, increase it, be able to communicate differently? Yes, it will. Do we know those answers yet at this point? No, we don't. But even without the technological advancements in computers, operating systems, different codings of technology, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing today with Staticom. It is through that technological advancement that allows Staticom to function with what it's doing today. So you're spot on as far as what you stated and how it will affect being able to communicate with other entities, other life forms. So yeah, you were spot on that.
I think
so interesting to see like a computer program, like you guys have a TV basically that you wheel out, or a projector that just casts around the room. And then these entities are then able to animate through an AI program that allows them to, and they're able to be free in this world. And it's sort of a meeting place for all of us to interact. And maybe it's a new, spirits are like, dude, thank God for inventing this. You know what I mean? Or thank God for Staticom coming along and giving us an easier way to sort of communicate with each other. Ron, what were you saying?
Yeah. I was saying, no, I think it's an interesting thing. I think it's important to focus on the fact that you're talking still about a transference of data and information, not experiential states.
Correct.
And I guess it would be interesting to see that play out the way you described it. It sounds really cool, because I think we do a lot of anthropomorphizing of the other side or who we're communicating with. I think if you had something visual like that, maybe that would remove some of the impetus to do it from our perspective. We know we get voices. We know that they're responsive, that they're interactive, they're engaged in the very environment as far as what we hear. There's a lot of other information that we would love to have, where they are, where they come from. If it's just consciousness, how it even melds with what we're doing. And there's a lot of those answers that may remain empirically elusive. We may never be able to get to that point, but anything that makes it more vivid, more, feels more visceral and connected, that's good, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, because maybe they'd feel more connected. You know what I mean? It's sort of like, hey, let's give you the opportunity to speak in the way that you want, because you think all the time about the spirit. Like y'all said, it's all around you all the time. And it seems like one of the interactions or relationships in this environment is that there's a director and then an actor. And you're sort of playing both roles. You're a conscious actor when you're awake, and you're directing in your sleep with the spirit world, and it's playing out around you, whatever. It's a fun concept to think about. Now, if you look at the world through that lens, then really there are things around you speaking to you constantly, but they're having a tough time because there's an interface issue, right? We can't hear the way that they speak because they speak in symbolisms and synchronicities, and those are very personal, which makes it subjective. So it's very hard to reproduce. It's very hard to prove. It's all these things, which you guys are not after and not needing. What I think is fascinating is that you're able to grab voices from somewhere and amplify them in a way that's audible. I think it's interesting and awesome. Before we get into the afterthought here, guys, I wanted to remind everybody that all the ways to find both of you gentlemen are located down in the show description. If you're an audio-only audience member, the video version of this is located down there as well. We also host the transcripts completely free for all the episodes over on Patreon, and that's where we host the Hangouts if you want to value exchange with us and support your favorite show. So now that we've said that, before we go into the afterthought, guys, I want to ask you specifically here about an event that you guys have coming up in Gettysburg, and to just ask you a couple more things about Gettysburg, because that's just something I want to ask people who do what you do about. Now, just a plug here, I happened to glance on your website there, which again, guys, located down in the show description. Your event in Gettysburg, the Gettysburg Hotel, will be on August 17th of this year, 2024. Go check it out. It sounds like a badass thing. And you hear crazy stories about Gettysburg. So I'm going to get out of your way. And you guys just tell us a little bit about that area, about your personal experiences in that area, and one of your favorite or most fascinating times that you've had out there, if you don't mind.
Go ahead, Ron.
All right. Yeah, well, I think if I'm not mistaken, this is the Rathman's first visit to Gettysburg. It's got everything that somebody who's interested in history or the supernatural or paranormal, whatever you want to call it would want to have. It's a touristy place. It's got amazing historic locations. They've got tours and reenactments, and you can stay at these places. And we've had tremendous experiences there at different places before. I think probably the highlight for us, and we've been there before, is going to be the one coming up, because it's going to be the first time that the Rathmans are going to be there, and we're going to be with them for that first time, and we're going to be at the Paranormal Symposium speaking as one of the chosen presenters on analytic idealism, which is the philosophy of consciousness, and ITC through, talking about our Staticom research. So we're going to be addressing both of those things in an academic setting. I think that's going to probably, to answer the best experience you've had in Gettysburg for us, that's probably going to be it.
Very cool. And you guys are going, it's going to be full moon when you're going. Yeah, we're doing this on the fly, gang. So full moon when you're going out there. Does the time of year and moon phase or astrology play an important role in your experiments or investigations while you're out there?
It doesn't for me.
That's another axiom that Ron was speaking to prior. There's certain things that, no one ever questions, like, oh, you put two mirrors together, you're going to create a portal. Right. Okay. And this is proven and understood happening.
Everybody knows that, Tony. Everybody knows that, dude.
Exactly.
Well, see, but that's exactly what an axiom is. It's just assumed and accepted. And that's part of the problem. There are so many axioms within the paranormal that people just think are truths and accepted. Do we know that putting two mirrors together create a portal? I don't know that we know that. Do we know that that doesn't happen? I don't think we know that either. But when it's something is just assumed, there's a saying about assumption. I'm not going to repeat it, but you make an ass out of yourself, and a lot of that does occur within the paranormal, and we try very hard to avoid those by not assuming anything. But I forgot what I was originally answering because I got off track. But
that was good. Keep
okay.
going.
You got fired up, and yeah, you're fucking going, man. We don't want to interrupt
that
you.
Was good.
Yeah, it's about assumptions and presuppositions, and I don't blame you. One of the reasons I asked is because of time stamps, like this idea that things are just sort of on a loop and that you can catch things. People have caught at predictable time periods where they know that they can go out to Gettysburg at this time, and they can hear a cannon go off and a few, these sort of predictable elements of the phenomena. We had a guy, Neil Geddes Ward, on the first show, Paranormal Peep Show in the UK. Shout out, guys. So they were talking about this time loop that happened with this guy that was working in a basement, that in the winter time, it was very specific that in this time frame with this, again, barometric pressure, humidity, all this stuff, this scene was visible, and it seemed to be a timestamp from a Roman era. And he was able to kind of debunk a couple of things Roman historians had known were, but couldn't verify, and he saw with his own eyes allegedly. So again, it seems that these time loops or something like that are something that's encountered in the type of work that you guys do.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on those?
I would caution against conflating causality with correlation.
Fair enough.
Because I think that can happen a lot. Things can happen concurrently. Every time you see a fire, you can correlate a fire truck and firemen, but that's not to say that they're the cause of the fire. So you do have that one thing to be mindful of. There could be certain things that might happen. There might be occurrences when this happens, and it always seems to be in the sign of Leo. But you've got to be able to draw a correlation to it. That's kind of how a basis for entanglement, for quantum entanglement, is if you have a field and there's things that are behaviors of the field of subjectivity that are happening, you'll have what appears to be the effect of entanglement. But we know from 40-something years of quantum field theory that there aren't discrete boundary particles, things that have standalone existence. They are just behaviors of the field. That's something we call them. The same way, if you, again, to quote Dr. Castro, if you look at ripples on a lake, you can measure height, width, speed, breadth, angular momentum. They have characteristics. They have physicality that you can measure, but there's nothing to the ripple but the lake. It's a behavior of the field. It's not something that exists. You can't take it off of the lake. Right. So you may have certain things that may be concurrent with something else. It's not necessarily causality. That's one of the issues behind the consciousness argument, right? That sometimes brain activity will correlate with experiential states, but sometimes, and you mentioned psychedelics before, they originally told people that that's your brain would light up like a 4th of July celebration on psychedelics, but we now know that that's not the case. The activity is reduced almost to nil. It's probably the closest you can get to death, and yet the experiential states are the most vivid and visceral that people have. So that rules, I think, causality out.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ron. The other thing too about determining causality, and we practice this religiously, is that we go from what's happening to what we believe, how it's occurring, in the straightest line possible without hitting a brick wall. And I know Ron's got a great story about footprints at the front door. I'd like him to tell it because it's a great example of how, if you're not going with the simplest route, the straight line route from cause to theory of how that's being caused, you can get sidetracked. And Ron, please tell that one, because it's a great example.
All right, yeah, no, I love that. This is why we work so well together. He knows what I'm thinking if I don't even say anything.
You guys are awesome. You guys are really a great team. You really are.
We appreciate that, and we appreciate the opportunity to come on here. We have a mutual love and respect between the four of us that I think if any team wanted to rival what we're doing, they would have to match that first. Never mind everything else that we're doing. We're just a couple of yo-yos with white noise. But yeah, what he's alluding to is that you can, is Occam's razor, right? The fewest theoretical entities, skeptical parsimony. We want to try to explain something, and we always try to explain it with what we already know. Can we take what we know to be true in our world, science, involved, and can we explain it with what we know? If we cannot, then you look at other things. And for us, like with the vocal phenomena, we think it meets a prima facie level of plausibility, makes it worth looking into. There's so much of it. So many different people have it. You can vet the authenticity of it, decibel levels, speeds and cadences beyond humans, capability to speak. So what he wants me to tell is that there's the interpretive data issue where you can take the same information, and from that, you can birth completely different theories that you can't prove or disprove. Like I could have footsteps in the mud outside my house tomorrow, and I could draw from that information the conclusion that somebody was going to break in, jiggled the knob, tested the window, saw a little magnet alarm system, saying this is a bad idea, it says secure, and he left. Or from the same information, I could also say that some ship came down from a few galaxies away, landed in the neighbor's backyard, broke into his tool shed behind the house, stole his Crocs, came over here, was going to try to get in my house, smelled popcorn from a house over, took that popcorn, went into space, didn't like it, and then threw it out. So now there's popcorn floating around in space somewhere, and somebody's Crocs are gone. From the same data starting point, you could theorize both of those things, but which one is inventing theoretical entities for the purposes of fleshing out a story, and which one's more skeptically parsimonious? It just takes only what you can know, what seems reasonable from what we do know, through inference, right? Maybe we don't know what happened outside, but we know that people walking outside and footprints can happen without adding things into the story that we don't know or we can't prove.
Man, that's where we get into the have you been lied to about what's going on and what your reality is and all those kind of things. Yeah. And are you considering it from an honest place? You're considering it from the best information you have at the time. Absolutely, man. And you guys are asking some phenomenal questions. And I love how open and honest you are about the data you're being presented and your ability to interpret it and your ability to ask these questions. And you're doing a great job, really. Like I said, you're a phenomenal team. I can't wait to meet the other half. So again, guys, all the ways to find them located down in the show description. Let's do one final thing here, and then we're going to get to our afterthought because I've got some more questions to ask you guys. And if you want to participate in that, again, the link down below that reads Patreon, Great way to support your show. You get all these afterthoughts as well as the hangouts after they happen. And with the right tier, you can come join us for those live. So, gentlemen, I want to know just from each of you here, Tony, we'll start with you. Just kind of cue this up. What gets you out of bed every morning? There's a crazy world around us, and I don't know what the spirits have been telling you, but it looks like it's getting crazier around here. So there's got to be something motivating you to hit feet ground every morning. And what is that, man?
Well, sorry, my wife just said something. I'm not sure what she said. But
she's
anyway,
got to be part of your answer then, right? Yeah.
She's part of what I'm about to explain. But 14 years ago, I didn't believe in anything paranormal. And it wasn't until she tricked me into going on a paranormal investigation with her that got me started in all this 14 years ago. But it was something that I found absolutely fascinating. I continue 14 years later to find it unbelievably fascinating. And now with the help of partnering with Ron and Lourdes, Cherie and I are part of the Staticom team. We have made fantastic advancements in it. And to see where it can go in the future is what literally gets me up every day, and to see what we can discover next, to see how far we can push the boundaries. Do we know the boundaries of Staticom? No, we don't. And every day reveals a little bit more, another piece of the puzzle. And we every day hopefully slap down another piece of that puzzle to see what that picture looks like. But it is the true passion and fascination within the paranormal, especially ITC and spirit communication, where you can get a voice out of nowhere answering a question with timing and relevance. And before you even hear what they said, I can tell if it's male or female. I can tell if it's an adult or child. I can determine their emotional state. Are they happy? Are they upset? Are they angry? Are they scared? All of that being determined by the way they're speaking, how they're pronouncing, the emotional impact within what they're saying. All that can be determined before I even hear what they said in response to the question I asked. That to me is absolutely fascinating and blows away any other paranormal device anywhere out in the market, because all that information can be derived from them answering a question. And that to me is absolutely fascinating and what motivates me to continue and keep going day after day.
Brilliant. I love it, man. Ron, what you got, dude?
I don't know. I feel like I should say something short and confusing, just not have to follow that eloquent answer like string cheese and then just go. But I'll give it a shot. He nailed one of the most important things. I think passion, passion for life, passion for the people in it. You know, we end every lecture when we do our presentations with a slide that has a picture of my mom on it. She passed in 2019. And I tell everybody, I don't want the takeaway from this moment to be how cool are they or how cool is what they do, communicating with the dead or the other side or whatever you want to call it. What I want you to take away from it is that that's something that partly we're driven to do now for ourselves and help other people because they've suffered the loss of somebody they love. So when you have those people around you now, embrace that. Tell them you love them, mend fences, do what you can if it's at all plausible to do, because that's way cooler than trying to get them to come through on white noise. That's so for me, that's part of it. And then trying to be grateful for everything. I think one of the toxins in the paranormal field these days is entitlement. I've been doing this long. I'm this smart. I'm this good. I'm this brilliant. Whatever. You owe me. You owe me. I should be there. Why is that guy doing it? It should be me. I think that ruins a lot of things for a lot of people. This podcast, I'm grateful to be here. I never would feel entitled. Well, I should be there. No. Everything you get, nobody owes you anything. I have a nice life. Everybody has their issues and stuff, but I have a son just graduated high school. I have a phenomenal partner in Lourdes, who's not here at the moment for the show. Two of the best friends I could ask for on the other side of the country, they're doing Staticom. I try to walk in gratitude because I think people miss that a lot. And then what we do, as Tony described it, is fascinating. It is fascinating to see voices that shouldn't be there from how we were raised, from what we were taught that reality or how the world works is. It's exciting to test that every single day, and it doesn't get old. And I've got 4 books on Amazon. Fifth one's close to getting done. now. I've written 2 academic white papers. We're working on a 3rd for the symposium we're doing. And that's probably another thing, kind of encapsulate the whole thing. I feel like I found a community that embraces us, and that where we can have a legacy, and I think that's one of the downsides of I think where religion went wrong with institution, because we look for that meaning in life in something. People look for it in bad relationship. They look for it in the bottom of a bottle. They look for it somewhere. And so the legacy that we're carving out in this field, which is why we're extremely grateful to be partnered with the Rathmans, because it's only gotten better. That's important, I think, to find that value and that meaning in your life. And it doesn't have to be something superficial, but it's something that means something to you.
Well said. Well said.
Just want to thank Tony and Ron for stopping by. Half of the Staticom project team over there. Fascinating conversation. You guys absolutely join the link below to check out the afterthought for this. We go very deep in that thing, as well as all of them. So check it out. It's a way for us to kind of, loosen up there, and you guys get some bonus content as well as supporting your favorite show. You can do that in the links below. So again, guys, just want to thank you all for absolutely crushing it. This life is wild and getting wilder. Thank you for doing the best you can to keep your wits about you, and at the same time, being nice to everybody that you come across. Being mindful, of course, of litter on the ground, scooping that shit up, because we can beautify the places we go, as well as getting out of that left lane, because that's a pain in the ass, and you all know it's true. If you got somebody behind you, just slide on over there, and they'll be right by. So thank you for doing that. And above and beyond anything else, guys, go out into this beautiful, whatever the fuck realm we're living in here, and just be good to one another. Thank you so much for watching, listening, liking, subscribing, sharing, all the good stuff. We'll see you next time.